بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، حمدا يوافي نعمه يكافي مزيدا. يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي للجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك. سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك، فلك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الأولين، وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين، وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد في كل وقت وحين، وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين، وصلي وسلم على سيدنا محمد حتى ترث الأرض ومن عليها أنت خير الوارثين. نويت تعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير والنفع انتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وبسنة الرسول صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم، ودعاء إلى الهدى ودلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. Now, continuation of the reading of the work of Imam al-Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala, Shama'il al-Muhammadiyya. Reach chapter 13, which the Imam rahimahullah ta'ala entitles Babu ma ja'a fi anna an-nabiyya sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam kan yatakhattamu fi yaminihi, and wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, wearing a ring on his blessed right hand, sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. وبه إليه قال حدثنا محمد بن سهل بن عسكر البغدادي وعبد الله بن عبد الرحمن قال حدثنا يحيى بن حسان حدثنا سليمان بن بلال عن شريك بن عبد الله بن أبي نمر عن إبراهيم بن عبد الله بن حنين عن أبيه عن علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله تعالى عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم كان يلبس خاتمه في يمينه. The tradition here of Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib karamallahu wajhuhu, who reported that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wore his ring on his blessed right hand, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's this that the Imam rahimahullah ta'ala is going to seek to affirm. Okay, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one, he took to a ring as we've affirmed inside of the previous chapter, but secondly, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam ordinarily, overwhelmingly, according to some, exclusively wore the ring upon his right hand, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. وبه إليه قال حدثنا محمد بن يحيى حدثنا أحمد بن صالح حدثنا عبد الله بن وهب عن سليمان بن بلال عن شريك بن عبد الله بن أبي نمر نحوه. Tradition with this transmission that was related with a meaning similar to the aforementioned. وبه إليه قال حدثنا أحمد بن منيع حدثنا يزيد بن هارون عن حماد بن سلمة قال رأيت ابن أبي رافع يتخطم في يمينه فسألته عن ذلك، فقال رأيت عبد الله بن جعفر يتخطم في يمينه، وقال عبد الله بن جعفر كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم يتخطم في يمينه. And the tradition here of Hamad ibn Salama rahimahullah ta'ala, who says that I saw Ibn Abi Rafi' and he put a ring on his right hand, and he wore the ring upon his right hand. And so I asked him about that, and he said that I saw Abdullah ibn Ja'far, and Abdullah ibn Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, in the rahimahullah ta'ala, from the khiyar of the Sahaba, as we made mention make a mention of saying Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is one of the elite from the Abadila, from those of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the younger companions who bear the name Abdullah radhiallahu anhu warda. And he's similar to his wife, to his close friend Abdullah ibn Zubair, yani rahimahullah ta'ala, and who's the first of all of the companions born in Medina to Munawwara. The first companion to be born in Medina is Abdullah ibn Zubayr rahimahullah ta'ala, meaning after the Hijrah. Whereas the first of the companions to be born in Habasha, in Abyssinia, is Abdullah ibn Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, rahimahullah ta'ala, from the khiyar of the Sahaba of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from amongst the youngsters of the companions. I saw Abdullah ibn Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, and he put a ring on his right hand. I wear a ring upon his right hand. And he, Sayyidina Abdullah radiallahu anhu warda, who said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would wear a ring on his blessed right hand, sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. وبه إليه قال حدثنا يحيى بن موسى حدثنا عبد الله بن نمير حدثنا إبراهيم بن الفضل عن عبد الله بن محمد بن عقيل عن عبد الله بن جعفر رضي الله تعالى عنهما أنه صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يتخطم في يمينه. And likewise, we see the tradition affirmed on the authority of Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Ja'far and ibn Abi Talib, rahimahullah ta'ala, that he, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, and he would wear a ring upon his blessed hand. You're going to see these traditions repeat themselves over and over. And Imam al-Tirmidhi, rahimahullah ta'ala, very, very clear. He wants what? The affirmation that the wearing of the ring is sunnah upon the right hand, as you see, as the companions report about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as the companions themselves wear it upon their right hands, and likewise also the tabi'een, those who take it from the Sahaba, likewise the traditions aforementioned are also wearing it upon their right hand. Rabi قال حدثنا أبو الخطاب يعني زياد بن يحيى حدثنا عبد الله بن ميمون عن جعفر بن محمد عن أبيه جعفر بن محمد يعني إمام جعفر الصادق عن أبيه يعني محمد الباقر يعني عن جابر بن عبد الله يعني رحمه الله تعالى أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يتختم the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. Sayyidina Jabir رحمه الله تعالى from the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم that his life will be extensive, يعني live a long life. You know, the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم commanded him to give salams to his son Muhammad, and أقري على ابن محمد بالسلام, and give salams to my son يعني Muhammad. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, and he said, and now you can see the connection of that inside this transmission. The connection here, saying Muhammad, that's the Muhammad al-Baqir, who's the son of Sayyidina Ali ibn Hussein, yani Zayn al-Abidin, who's the son of Hussein, and who's the son of Sayyidina Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, and obviously Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, and then that now being the daughter, the blessed daughter and the peace of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so there you see Sayyidina Jabir ibn Abdullah now meeting the great and grandson of the Prophet Sayyidina Hussein, the grandson Sayyidina Zayn al-Abidin, the great grandson Sayyidina Muhammad al-Baqir, the great grandson of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And you see the connection here in this and Abihi, his father, who's Sayyidina Muhammad al-Baqir, rahimahullah ta'ala, the authority of Sayyidina Jabir ibn Abdullah ibn al-Haram, يعني رحمه الله تعالى ونفع خطبه في يمينه. The tradition likewise we see would wear a ring upon his blessed right hand صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. وبه إليه قال حدثنا محمد بن حميد الرازي حدثنا جرير عن محمد بن إسحاق عن الصلت ابن عبد الله قال كان ابن عباس قاله إلا قال كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وصحبه وسلم تختم في يمينه. So Salt ibn Abdullah reports that Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, the Sahabi, the Jalil, where he would wear a ring on his right hand radiallahu ta'ala anhu wa an abihi. As far as I recall, okay, and he said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would wear a ring upon his blessed hand sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's not just observing Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas, but he, as far as I can recall here, and word in the Arabic language, ikhal. Except if it's through aslan, or yani mazidan, except if it's a quadrilateral verb, whether it's original quadrilateral or considered to be an advanced and increased verb upon the thulathi, upon the triliteral yani verb, then it can carry a dhamma. Okay, the exception of all exceptions is the harf al-mudari' carrying a kasra. So if you look in the Arabic language, wala ikhalu, that ikhalu, and it's a synonym of dhan. And dhan in the Arabic language can have two meanings, and actual, that which lacks certainty. I think, I assume, I thought, I recall. It's not about recalling something. This is what he believes to be the case, although he's not certain. That is the dominant, some say it's the exclusive meaning. And the Imam of late, Shaykh Abdul Rahman Habanaka, and he has one of his works, which he looks at the words inside of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he deals with the word dhanna. He's believed that the word dhanna exclusively has the meaning of what? Of conjectural, that lacks certainty. Okay, exclusively has that meaning. Illa, yani, what the other Imams, the Imams prior, the Imams of language, anhum wardahum, say that the second meaning of the, as in the book of Allah Ta'ala, as an example, like Surah Yunus, Allah Ta'ala said, وَظَنَّ أَهْلُهَا أَنَّهُمْ قَادِرُونَ عَلَيْهَا, that the people of earth, dhann, and the dhann is not conjectural, that they are certain now, they reach a point of certainty, that they're all powerful over the earth, that they exert power over the entirety of planet earth. And so at that point, Allah Ta'ala destroys them by night, Jalla Jalaluhu wa Ta'ala. I appoint here, as far as I can recall, or without certainty, you can carry it upon both ways, i.e., that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would wear a ring upon his blessed hand. He wants to affirm that, but he also wants to affirm the fact that Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas, rahimahullah ta'ala, as is proper, is imitating the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and his blessed cousin, Abdullah bin Abbas, the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, the very act of ﷺ, which is the ring upon his blessed right hand, ﷺ. And that hadith in the Sahih and others is that the Prophet ﷺ, and he had a khansar here, this finger, the little finger, is where the Prophet ﷺ, and overwhelming the traditions is where he wears his ring, here. Although there are traditions here that relate here, second, the bin there, and so looking at it overall, we bring all the traditions together, that the Rasul is going to wear the ring upon his right hand with these two fingers, with the strongest being this finger, okay, in terms of the number of transmissions that we have in relation to where he wore his ring, the Tirmidhi would also ونقش فيه محمد رسول الله ونهى أن ينقش أحد عليه وهو الذي سقط في من معقيب في بئر أريس رضي الله عنه. هكذا الحديث from نافع from Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar ibn Khattab رضي الله تعالى عنه وارضاه. He said that the Prophet ﷺ had taken for himself a silver ring, as affirmed that the Rasul ﷺ wore a ring silver. As we said, the Prophet ﷺ three types of ring, metals of his ring ﷺ. He wore iron ring, affirmed ﷺ. We understand at the beginning of the affair. He likewise also wore a gold ring ﷺ, right? Likewise at the beginning of the affair. But then thereby the Prophet was going to settle exclusively upon a silver ring ﷺ. And he would turn its bezel inward, towards his blessed palm. I would wear it this way, ﷺ, not ﷺ, wear it that way, ظاهرا. Although there are a hadith that he wore his ring like this, there are a hadith, okay, but the Imam, rahimahullah ta'ala, they said that would not ordinarily be the case, that the Rasul would wear the ring like this, but rather the Prophet would wear it this way, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, mimma yali kaffa, so that the foss here, the bezel here, would be towards his blessed palm, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Of the Imams, rahimahullah ta'ala, what they want from it is what it's greater in the preservation of this. Okay, that it's inward, it preserves the actual naqsh, just whether it's a stone or whether it's something engraved. One. From the Imams like Imam Nawawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, commented upon inside the Sahih of Imam Muslim, says it's a more humble to wear it this way. Yeah, it's more humble. It'd be fitting of the Prophet ﷺ, Sayyid al-Mutawaddi'een, the master of all those who are characterized with humility ﷺ, because this way is more towards zina, it's more towards adornment when you're showing like the actual ring. But this way is more towards somebody having more khumul, more setter, quote unquote, of the zina that Allah Ta'ala has bestowed upon them. Likewise, we also made mention, likewise also, as you know, when the Prophet ﷺ, when he went to the khala, when he wanted to answer the call to nature, naza', the Prophet would take off the ring, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But when the ring is this way, then it's easier for the Rasul, as the Imam, the Fuqaha say, just here, just to close your fist. Why? Obviously, because upon the ring of the Rasul, the ring that's in the hands of Mu'aqib, as inside of this tradition, it's going to be used, quote unquote, for stamp and correspondence, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, seal and correspondence, and upon it, Nuqish, Muhammad Rasul Allah. Upon it is the name that Allah Ta'ala imprints upon his throne, subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first act inside of creation there, the imprinting upon the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, la ilaha illa Allah Muhammad, Allah Muhammad, okay? Jalla Jalala wa ta'ala ta'azamatu. I would say, so the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he would turn its bezel, the first, inward towards his blessed palm, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Engraved upon it was Muhammad, the messenger of God, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. It's important, again, we distinguish that the Rasul down to two. Okay, there's a ring that the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam would and could ordinarily wear. The ring that he could or would ordinarily wear had a gemstone. It was a gemstone. Overwhelmingly, the gemstone is from the gemstone that was made from onyx, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that were mined from the Yemen. Although the mines of the Yemen were previously, quote unquote, controlled by the Abyssinians. That's why the first Habashian, that's when the tradition we read that the actual bezel was Abyssinian in nature, mined in Yemen, although previously controlled by the Abyssinians when they had a 20-year rule over the Yemen that they won. Otherwise, the Prophet ﷺ has the ring that upon it is Muhammad Rasul Allah. Okay? Now that ring he doesn't ordinarily wear, وسلم, but he merely uses it to seal correspondence when he's now, quote unquote, inviting emperors, kings, the sayyids, the chiefs of the world to the way of Allah Ta'ala, to Islam. And that ring is exclusively inside the hands of Abu Fatima, and Mu'aqib ad-Dawsi, rahimahullah ta'ala, as we find inside of this tradition. He forbade anyone from having the same engraving. Okay, so having a ring that has Muhammad Rasulullah upon it, then there's a nahi. The Imams, rahimahullah ta'ala, you want to understand what is the nahi, the prohibition. And first and foremost, you understand the prohibition is because this is the peculiar seal of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so when you have a seal, the seal is meant to be unique. And if you try to understand seals for us now, signature. If someone has the same signature as you, problematic, isn't it? The signature has to be unique. And so the seal of the Rasul has to be unique in the age of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam before the loss of the ring. And so the Rasul prohibiting the Sahaba from having a ring that has the same naqsh upon it, has the same engraving upon it, okay? Although, and this is important, although we do have a tradition that Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal, rahimahullah ta'ala, had the ring upon it was Muhammad Rasulullah, Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal. And what the Imams want to understand by that, okay, then this would have been after, quote unquote, Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal, then after the actual death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or the use of the seal. That interpretation is problematic. Why is it problematic? Because Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal, rahimahullah ta'ala, he dies in the first few years of the Khilafat of Umar ibn al-Khattab, rahimahullah ta'ala. And how we understand it is that Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab is still using the seal of the Rasul, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, up until, as we find in this tradition, the age of Uthman. So the seal still must be unique, isn't it? Well, how then does Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal, rahimahullah ta'ala, remember the most knowledgeable man after the prophets themselves, have a ring upon his Muhammad Rasulullah? That opens up the bab. And it opens up the bab, meaning after, regardless whether it's after the life of the Rasul sallallahu or after the loss of the ring, now the permissibility of having a ring upon it, Muhammad Rasulullah, the Naqsh, Muhammad, the messenger of God upon it. Although the Imams still, mashallah, have something, the Shafi'i fuqaha, they still consider it to be makruh, that it's makruh, it's disliked to have a ring, Muhammad Rasulullah. But we see A'immat ad-Din, mashallah ta'ala, and taking a ring upon it is the naqsh of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi, the engraving of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, and so here that he forbade, so that's why you underline forbade, the meaning of that, anyone from having the same engraving. This is the same ring that fell from the hand of Mu'aqib into the well of Aris well. Okay, again, we made mention of it. Did it fall from the hand of Sayyidina Mu'aqib, rahimahullah ta'ala? Yani, Aris. Why? Because Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan has summoned the ring, he summoned Mu'aqib because he needs the ring to stamp correspondence, Sayyidina Uthman, rahimahullah ta'ala. And so now, as in this tradition, does it fall from the hands of Mu'aqib, okay, which is seemingly attributed to Mu'aqib. And the basis, you say, well, why is the attribution of Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar to Sayyidina Mu'aqib, rahimahullah ta'ala? Because he's the ring holder. And so if he's the ring holder, he's the one who's meant to safeguard and safekeep the ring. And so if the ring is lost, who are you going to blame? You're going to blame Mu'aqib. because the Rasul appointed him as the one to stand guard over the ring. That's the only way you can understand it. Otherwise, when we bring the traditions together, then you're most likely going to point the finger at saying Uthman ibn Affan. Then rahimahullah ta'ala. As he said, the Imam say it's in the Prophet. That's what they say. So does Mi'aqib let go, drop it into the hands of Uthman, such that it doesn't reach the hands of Uthman and go straight into the well of Aris, there at Quba? Or is it that saying Uthman, he drops into the hands of Uthman, so Uthman takes it, but it immediately drops out of his hand? He doesn't take it properly. Or does Sayyidina Uthman take the ring from Mu'aqib, and then Sayyidina Uthman there himself with the ring, as the tradition alludes to, وَكَانَ يَلْعَبُ بِهِ. And Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, as we said, like in the Lord of the Rings there, like he's playing with the ring, Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, and rahimahullah ta'ala. And it's in that process, then the ring actually falls into the well of Aris, the great well of the Prophet ﷺ, never to be retrieved. As we said, that well of Aris, blessed. Why? Because it's the well that holds the saliva of the Prophet ﷺ to this day, but it's also the well that actually holds the ring of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to this day. That ring, by virtue of which the fate of the Ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is tied to. وبه إليه قال حدثنا قتيبة بن سعيد حدثنا حاتم بن إسماعيل عن جعفر بن محمد عن أبيه قال كان الحسن والحسين رضي الله عنهما يتختمان في يسارهما. هكذا once here, يعني on the authority of Ja'far ibn Muhammad, again a Sadiq, on the authority of his father, Hussein Muhammad al-Baqir, that's Sayyidina Hassan and Hussein, okay, radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, would each wear a ring upon their left hand. Against inqita', because obviously the father here, Sayyidina Muhammad al-Baqir, doesn't meet Sayyidina Hassan, his uncle, nor does he meet, quote unquote, Sayyidina Hussein, his grandfather, his granduncle and his grandfather. Sayyidina Muhammad al-Baqir, the son of Zayn al-Abidin. Zayn al-Abidin, of the only surviving members of Ahlul Bayt upon the day of Karbala, as a young, Zayn al-Abidin. So Muhammad al-Baqir does not meet Sayyidina Hussein radiallahu anhu wa, yet he's reporting upon their behalf. But otherwise, it's clear that this is something that's kept within inside of the family, and that no doubt he would have took knowledge of what Sayyidina Hassan and Sayyidina Hussein were from Sayyidina Ali bin Hussein, his very father, Sayyidina Zayn al-Abidin, radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'ina. Although the Imams don't want to embrace it because it's speaking about them wearing it upon their left. And if they're going to wear it upon their left, then no doubt it's something that they would have took from their grandfather, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. But that's what the Imams struggle to reconcile, like the Prophet and wearing it upon his left. Illa, save that some of the Imams, if they want to interpret the tradition, they say, okay, maybe this here is from the khususiyya of Ahlul Bayt. Now this is now elect for the family of the Prophet ﷺ, for the family of the Prophet ﷺ to distinguish themselves from the rest of the corpus of the Sahaba and those who come thereafter. As opposed to wearing it upon their right hand, they'd wear it upon their left hand. Okay, that's a position some of the Imams hold. Radiallahu anhum wa ardahum. Although again, part of the problem in that you also have a tradition that the Prophet ﷺ wore it upon his left. Okay, so you can carry that. But then also Abu Bakr and Umar wore it upon their left. We have traditions of that, okay? And so, again, how do we reconcile that Abu Bakr and Umar wore it upon their left? The way you bring it all together is it's overwhelming upon the right, but then there can be occasions where it can be worn upon the left. That's the easiest way. You need to bring it together. Otherwise, you say that's from the khususiyya, it's from the elect quality, the distinguishing qualities of the family of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And إليه قال حدثنا عبد الله بن عبد الرحمن أنبأنا محمد بن عيسى وابن الطباع حدثنا عباد بن العوام عن سعيد بن أبي عروبة عن قتادة عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله تعالى عنهم أنه صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يتختم في يمينه. Imam al-Tirmidhi, right back to his point, as an authority in Anas rahimahullah ta'ala, who we know is the Imam of the ring. When the ring, the traditions that describe the ring of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on behalf of Sayyidina Anas ibn Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, in which he says that the Prophet ﷺ would wear a ring on his blessed right hand, sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. وبه إليه قال حدثنا محمد بن عبيد المحاربي حدثنا عبد العزيز بن أبي حازم عن موسى بن عقبة عن نافع عن ابن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما قال اتخذ رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم خاتما من ذهب فكان يلبسه في يمينه فاتخذ الناس خواتيم من ذهب فطرحه صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وقال لا ألبسه أبدا فطرح الناس خواتيمهم. The hadith of Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar, to close the bab, radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, he said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam had taken a gold ring for himself sallallahu alayhi wasallam that he would wear upon his blessed hand sallallahu alayhi wasallam. As we mentioned previously, that's the beginning of the affair. When the Rasul now takes to the ring sallallahu alayhi wasallam, initially he's going to wear an iron ring and he's also going to wear a gold ring sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Thereafter Allah ta'ala is going to reveal the prohibition of gold. Okay, gold upon what? Upon men. Sallallahu Jalla Jalaluhu wa ta'ala. It's at that point when the prohibition for men wearing gold is revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Tarah. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is no longer going to wear gold. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's what we want here. That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is taken a gold ring for himself that he would wear upon his blessed right hand. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. People then, the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, yani then began taking gold rings for themselves. I started wearing gold rings. Why? Ittiba. They be commanded to radically adhere to the example set by the Prophet ﷺ in all regards. And so when the Prophet ﷺ wears a gold ring, then they wear a gold ring. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Thereby, upon seeing this, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ tossed the ring aside. Tarah, mean he no longer wore it, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. It could actually be a physical tarh, throwing the ring. As we see in a tradition of one of the companions, radiallahu anhum wardahum, who was wearing a gold ring. And he was wearing a gold ring after where gold. That's where it's impermissible. Yeah. You sure? So why you just go and pick it up and smelt it and use it as currency? I'd never pick up anything that the Prophet ﷺ literally threw away. And so what you want here in the hadith of Abdullah bin Umar, yani radiallahu ta'ala, yani anhu, yani use the term for tarah. Tarah in the Arabic language very clear. Rasul cast even his own ring. And the Rasul is emphasizing the fact that this is impermissible للرجال, for men, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, although permissible for women. Upon seeing this, the Messenger of Allah tossed the ring aside, saying, I will never wear it ever again. And so people then, the Sahaba, began to toss their rings aside in imitation of the Prophet ﷺ too. The exact action that he does, they begin to do themselves. Radiallahu ta'ala anhum wardahum. Chapter 14, which is Babu ma ja'a fi sifati sayfi Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And chapter 14 is what has been narrated concerning the description of the sword of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Hakada, the tradition. And the basis of them, in chapter 14 after chapter 13, is going with the basis of the ring of the Prophet ﷺ is da'wah, isn't it? He's now sending letters 6 years after Hijrah to all of the emperors, the kings, the chiefs of the entire world. ﷺ. So the ring is a symbolism for the da'wah, the summoning of the Prophet ﷺ to the way of Allah Ta'ala, Udu'u ila sabili rabbika, and summon unto the way of your Lord. Okay, but what happens if they refuse to accept the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ, as was overwhelmingly the case? Yani. What happens then? Then the sword, innit? When the Prophet ﷺ takes to the sword, it's like, the great Imam of Banu Umayyah, of Umayyads of Banu Umayyah, whose name is Abdurrahman al-Dakhil. And Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, who similar to what Sayyidina Ali bin Hussein witnesses at Karbala in the massacre of the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There, likewise, Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, there he witnesses the massacre of Banu Umayyah. Hakada the world, isn't it? The world comes, Banu Umayyah witnesses that the Umayyads are being massacred by the Abbasids and being massacred by them, to the point that he actually dives into spare your lives. And so everybody swims back to the shore except Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, isn't it? But Abdurrahman the face is Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, and then from the water he witnesses them who swam back all being slaughtered upon the shore, upon the seashore there. And so thereby he swims away. Yani radiallahu anhu. Of knowledge, the sanad of the transmission of Imam, and the major transmitter of the Muwatta of Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, Hakada from Andalus, he's the one who says that when I went into the presence of Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, the Umayyad, okay, Abdurrahman the first, they call him al-Dakhil. Al-Dakhil means the one who enters, the immigrant, and the one who migrates, coach to Andalus. When I went into the presence of al-Dakhil, I've never seen anybody with more haiba than him. And haiba, khalas, that they instill awe, fear inside of your heart. You shake in his presence. Like we looked at the tradition, we say, Qayla bin Makhrama, when she enters into the presence of the Rasul, she's just shaken in the presence of the Rasul, the haiba, She said, Hakada wa dakhil, rahimahullah ta'ala, haiba, he had haiba, radiyallahu anhu wardahu. Thereby, Yahya Laythi there, he said he's going to now travel from Spain all the way to Medina. Talib al-ilm, why he's going to sit at the feet of the great Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala. Take the muwatta from Imam Malik. He said, now when I went into the presence of Imam Malik ibn Anas, rahimahullah ta'ala, Abdurrahman al-Dakhil became insignificant in my eyes, show Imam Malik in the presence of Imam Malik, shuf, Imam Malik king, dunya and akhirah, rahimahullah ta'ala. Even the great Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, when I sat in the presence of Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, the pages of the book, I'd be so careful to turn over the pages of the book so that Malik couldn't hear waqa'at al-suhuf. Malik couldn't hear the actual movement of the pages. So I didn't even want Malik to hear me move the page. Imam Shafi'i speaking in the presence of the great Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala. What's the point? Dakhil, rahimahullah ta'ala, and the Umayyad there in Spain, although, mashallah, look, khalas, what Spain had and what he had as the caliph, the absolute caliph inside of Andalusia, Abdurrahman al-Dakhil there, he said he would live inside of the royal court, inside of a tent. He still lived like a Bedouin. And so now when the kings of Europe would come to pay homage to him, and they're inside of Cordoba, Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, he'd have to enter into his presence. First and foremost, he'd want to humiliate them. So he'd have his guards, and the guards, with the chapter here, they'd all unsheathe swords. And with their swords, they'd make like an arch. And so thereby the kings of Europe would have to bow their heads between the arches of these swords when they come to see a dakhil. وَهُمْ صَاغِرُونَ, as Allah Ta'ala says. And then thereby, shuf, now when they entered, they asked, now, well, where is the caliph? They said, look at the tent in the courtyard. And he's inside that tent in the courtyard. And so they'd go into the tent, and there's Abdurrahman al-Dakhil sitting. And he said, al-Dakhil would sit, and he'd have three things. The first thing, he'd have a mushaf. The second thing, he'd have a sword. The third thing, he'd have a fire. Three things he has. Mushaf, sword, fire. And they would sit. He said, the message is simple. The message is, I call you to that. And he pointed at the Quran, the mushaf. That's I call you to that. You accept and you embrace that, then we're brothers in religion. You fail, then he points to the sword. I take up that, we go to war. Sure. You die beneath that, then he points to the fire. You go to that. Hakada, now leave. Hakada, they say, now leave. Hakada, the message simple, Sure. And the sword or fire, or the sword or the book, as the Imams rahimahullah ta'ala said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he sent what? Kitab al-Hadi wa Sayf al-Nasir. He sent him Jalla Jalaluhu ta'ala the guiding book and the victorious sword. They come together, and when the deen lacks one of them, then the deen is naqas. There's a deficiency in the religion. If the deen, quote, has the book, that the people just with the book of Allah Ta'ala, but they don't have the sword, okay, then shuf, the deen is going to be deficient as it manifests upon the face of the earth. That's why the Imams, rahimahullah ta'ala, they say when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, جاء الحق وزحق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا, truth comes and falsehood perishes, and falsehood by its nature perishes when truth comes. And so they say, well, truth came in Mecca, so why didn't falsehood perish inside of Mecca in the age of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam? It's because they lacked the sword. They lacked the sword. But when the sword manifests in Medina to Munawwara, now جاء الحق وزحق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا. And that is why that's the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as he makes tawaf around the Kaaba upon Qaswa, with Sayyidina Usama upon the back of the camel as he's making tawaf around the Kaaba. 8th year, Fat Mecca. Look at the Rasul, جاء الحق, as he's pointing to the idols with his stick, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, جاء الحق وزحق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا. Truth has now come with the sword, with power. Yani. 10,000 Sahaba have locked down Mecca al-Mukarramah. وزحق الباطل. And now falsehood now is perishing. إن الباطل كان زهوقا. And falsehood by its very nature, and it perishes. And so the chapter here is a chapter concerning the description of the sword of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which, as we know, is one of the great symbols of the reality of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the Musnad of Ahmad bin Hanbal, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, "Bu'ithtu bis-sayf bayna yaday sa'a hatta yu'bad Allahu wahdahu la sharika lah." The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "I've been sent with the sword, and in front of me ahead lies the hour, hatta yu'bad Allah, until God is worshipped wahdahu, alone, la sharika lahu, having no partners. وَجُعِلَ رِزْقِ تَحْتَ ظِلِّ رُمْحِ." And my provision, the Prophet goes on to say, has been placed beneath the shade of spears. And war, the Prophet said, my provision has been placed beneath the shade of spears. وَجُعِلَ رِزْقِ تَحْتَ ظِلِّ رُمْحِ. يعني وَكُتِبَ ظِلُّ وَالصَّغَائِرِ عَلَى مَنْ خَالَفَ أَمْرِ. And dhil here, which is what? Humiliation. وَالصَّغَائِرِ, to be small, abasement, has been decreed for anybody khalafa amri, anybody who contradicts my affair, anybody who goes against my affair shall be humiliated and abased by Allah Ta'ala. Hakadha the Prophet says, then he says, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَمَنْ تَشَبَّهَ بِقَوْمٍ فَهُوَ مِنْهُمْ. And whoever imitates a people is of those people. Yani. When you learn the Sahaba, who are they imitating? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so thereby the big question that is warranted for us, who then are we imitating? Sure, we're the people of Allah Ta'ala Azzana. As Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab says, Allah Ta'ala declares Izzah. And for us, when we imitate the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and if we take other quote on the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam as a guide, as a point of emulation, adhallan Allah. Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab says, and Allah Ta'ala abases and humiliates us, Jalla Jalaluhu wa Ta'ala Azamatuhu. طيب وبه إليه قال حدثنا محمد بن بشار حدثنا وهب بن جرير حدثنا أبي عن قتادة عن أنس رضي الله تعالى عنه قال يعني قال كان قبيعة سيف رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من فضة. Okay, so here the first tradition he brings rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam al-Tirmidhi, is that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the pommel of the sword, okay, the bottom of the handle of the sword of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and it was of silver, was made of silver, okay, and he decorative. And so what he wants, rahimahullah ta'ala, again, which connects between the ring and this chapter, is the permissibility of using silver in a decorative sense, okay, upon alat al-harb, upon what instruments of war, like the sword here, okay, that's the tradition as it relates to the sword of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Remember, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had several swords, and the dominant opinion that the Prophet has 9 swords, sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, and very important swords and very famous swords. And that day shows you, again, it shows you the greatness of the Prophet sallallahu as a swordsman. Why? Because we don't have any tradition in which the sword of the Prophet sallallahu breaks, in which he breaks his swords. Despite the fact in the hadith of Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib, the hadith of Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar, that the Prophet sallallahu the closest to the enemy. In the hadith of Sayyidina Ali, that we would take shelter behind the Rasul sallallahu in the thick of war. He's the closest to the enemy, sallallahu sword unsheathed. Yet we don't have a tradition in which the Rasul breaks the sword, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. I look at the parallel in terms of the sword of God, saying Khalim Walid, Sayf Allah Maslul, the sword of God, the name, the Rasul. Those curvatures inside of the vertebrae. That's what was understood to be the fiqar. That in the sword of the Rasul, it had these elegant curvatures as part of a decorative measure. Okay, inside of the sword of the Prophet, and that's the most famous one. And that some of them say it was from the spoils of the Prophet at where at Badr. The sword was originally the sword of Abu Jahl. It was originally Abu Jahl's sword, and it's from the spoils of the Prophet gets at the Battle of Badr. Likewise, also from the famous sword of the Rasul is al-Mahthur. He brought him a sword called Mahthur sallallahu. And that sword special because that's a sword, mashallah ta'ala, that the Prophet sallallahu inherits from whom? From his father. So it's from the inheritance of the Prophet sallallahu from Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib, his father, and the radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who rather Rasul sallallahu will wield that, and sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and to the time that he takes flight to Allah Ta'ala. Okay, so the pommel of the sword of Allah Ta'ala's messenger was silver. وبه إليه قال حدثنا محمد بن بشار حدثنا معاذ بن هشام حدثنا أبي عن قتادة عن سعيد بن أبي الحسن البصري يعني قال كانت قبيعة سيف رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في الضاء. Okay, on the authority of Sa'id ibn Abi al-Hasan al-Basri. It is the brother of Hassan al-Basri, rahimah, the brother of Hassan al-Basri. In transmission is thiqa, somebody upright, yani, just like his more famous brother. So he reports that the pommel of the sword of Allah Ta'ala's messenger was silver. Yani the tradition, وَبِي لَيْ قَالَ يعني حدثنا أبو جعفر محمد بن سدران البصري حدثنا طالب بن حجير عن حود وهو ابن عبد الله بن سعيد عن جده قال دخل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم مكة يوم الفتح وعلى سيفه ذهب وفضة. قال طالب فسألته عن الفضة فقال كانت قبيعة السيف فضة. Okay, so the tradition here in authority of Mazbuda, who reported the Messenger of Allah entered Mecca on the day of the conquest, Fatah Mecca, 8th year after Hijrah, inside of Ramadan, and his sword was adorned with both gold and silver. Silver permissible, yani, that the Imams as decorative means, but gold, the Imams, rahimahullah ta'ala, yani, believe it's impermissible as a decorative means. So the reason that his sword would have had gold, if it had gold, would, in order to be sort of to mend a breakage in the sword, okay, to mend a breakage inside of the sword, and that being permissible according to the fuqaha, so long as it's not a great amount. And so his sword was adorned with gold and silver. Ma'na, adorned with silver, but it had gold. Okay, as a means of what was mending the sword. Talib said, I asked him about the silver. Okay, and they replied, the sword's pommel was silver. Okay, because the silver is the one for decorative means. That's why I focus upon that. As for the gold, you understand that it's for other than that. وبه إليه قال حدثنا محمد بن شجاع البغدادي حدثنا أبو عبيد الحداد عن عثمان بن سعد عن ابن سيرين رضي الله تعالى عنه قال صنعت سيفي على سيف سمرة ابن جندب وزعم سمرة أنه صنع سيف على سيف رسول سيفه على سيف رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وكان حنفيا. Okay, the hadith of Sayyidina Ibn Sirin, as we know that is Sayyidina Muhammad ibn Sirin, rahimahullah ta'ala, the great Imam of the Tabi'een. He says, radiallahu ta'ala, anhu warda, I had my sword made on the model of Samara ibn Jundub, Samara ibn Jundub, the companion. And so Sayyidina Muhammad ibn Sirin, now rahimahullah ta'ala, he's making an exact replica, his sword, an exact replica of the sword of Sayyidina Samara, radiallahu anhu warda. Why? Because Samara said that his sword was made on the model of the sword belonging to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he's saying Muhammad al-Sirin is going to be a replica of the sword of Samura, and saying a Samura sword is a replica of the sword of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What you want from that is that, and that it was of Hanafi make. وَكَانَ حَنَفِيًّا. Hanafiyan here is in reference to Banu Hanifa, not in reference to Abu Hanifa, but in reference to Banu Hanifa. Banu Hanifa of the tribes of the Najd, of the higher plateaus of Arabia, Musaylim al-Kadhab, the tribe of Musaylim al-Kadhab, and it comes from. And they're sword makers, and they're supreme sword makers. Ordinarily, the Hijaz, Western Arabia, their swords either are from India, or the steel that they use with their swords, or being made in Mecca and Medina, are from India. The Imams differ. Okay, that's what you call muhannad. So when you listen to what the Imams of Western Arabia, the preferred sword for Western Arabia at the age of the Prophet ﷺ, the companions, are swords that are muhannad. Muhannad here, Hind, made from Hind. Yani. And you say either the steel as well as the craftsmanship is from India, or just the steel is from India, isn't it? Which is obviously one of the greatest places of iron deposits, isn't it? To this day, the magnets of the wealthiest men upon earth are those who the steel magnets, isn't it? Of India. Okay. And so here, that's the Western Arabia. And that's why we see in the tradition of in the verse of Sayyidina Ka'b ibn Zuhair in his Bennett Su'ad, that's when he praises the Prophet sallallahu inna rasula la sayfun, very the messenger is a safe, is a sword, yustada'u bihi, from whom light is drawn, muhannad, the word. Muhannad means siyufillahi maslulu. Okay, the sword is muhannad, and it's the best sword crafted in India, or of the best steel from India. The Prophet sallallahu means siyufillah, from the swords of God, maslulu, unsheathed. Echoed the famous verse by saying Ka'b ibn Zuhair. So the Rasul will now wrap his burda around saying Ka'b ibn Zuhair. Well, otherwise, the Najd, the supreme sword makers, were Banu Hanifa. And the Rasul had a sword from Banu Hanifa. That's what you want. But you also want to understand that that's supreme, but it's different to the sword that the Rasul ordinarily has, which are Muhannad, and the Muhannad sword. And now you get a glimpse of that in the Battle of the Garden, of the Hadiqah, the Battle of the Garden, again when in the age of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, when Abu Bakr unleashes the companions against Banu Hanifa, not only in their refusal to enter into the fold of Islam, but more so now that they're threatening Medina to Munawwara with war, threatening Abu Bakr with war, as were many of the Arabs. Okay? And so Abu Bakr unleashes Sayyidina Khalid Walid, the army ahead of it is Sayyidina Khalid Walid, rahimahullah ta'ala. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr, because of a deeper sir that lies with Banu Hanifa, the Najd, from which the horns of the devil, and he rises, the Prophet ﷺ says, Abu Bakr wants every one of them killed. It's not even going just to win a battle, just exterminate all of them. Abu Bakr tells, Abu Bakr the soft one, telling Sayyidina Khalid Walid, rahimahullah ta'ala. And so the point being, in the Battle of the Garden now, which is the most fierce battle the Sahaba ever fought, he said that when they faced the might of Banu Hanifa now in awaiting the Sahaba to arrive, have unsheathed. So they've unsheathed their swords, and they're all pointing their swords, quote unquote, towards the sky in battle array. And so when the Sahaba see that, experienced in war, he said, today is a rout. The battle will be easy today. And so saying, Khalid, the sword of God, asks, and why do you make such a remark? And they say, because we all know the heat of Arabia, and you don't unsheathe a sword, and you don't point it, quote unquote, to the sun, you don't expose it to the sun. Rather, the Sahaba, radiallahu anhum, who were very unique swordsmen, that's one of the reasons why Allah Ta'ala reveals it in previous revelation, the Torah, etc., that the Sahaba, those around the last prophet, that they carry their swords upon their back. I mean, they unsheath from the back. So ordinary swordsmen are going to unsheath from the left, dominant right hand. So you can unsheath from the left. But the Sahaba, they unsheath from the back, which better, because if you sheath from the back, regardless of what hand you are, you can unsheath. You don't have to sort of swap sides if you're left-handed swordsman. So from the back, it facilitates both right-handed and left-handed. But also from a perspective, it's quote unquote, it's more clandestine, isn't it? I mean, it can be worn on the back in a way that it's concealed, that a person doesn't necessarily know a person is armed with a sword, as opposed if you're armed, as you see traditional samurai always from the left, always from the left, even if you're left dominant, it's exposed. And so the Sahaba, they're unique, very, very unique as swordsmen. The point is, they know the sword. Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, yani wa ardahum. And so now when the Sahaba are saying that swordsmen don't do that. Why? Because you unsheathe, you strike, and then you resheathe. Why? Because that's going to maintain the sharpness, quote unquote, of the steel, isn't it? Whereas when you expose it to the sun of Arabia, the intensity of the sun of Arabia will begin to blunt the sword. So the sword won't strike, won't cut as good as it's meant to cut. Yani. Sure. Like swords, like if you see in terms of katanas, Japanese swords can cut through bone. They can slice bone. Yani. Sure. Okay. And the sword, but you want to maintain its sharpness. And so here, quote unquote, Sayyidina Khalid al-Walid, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, not these swords. These are different swords. These are swords that are Banu Hanifa, and these are Hanafi swords, which is what we want here. And they say the difference with Hanafi swords, either steel or the way it's crafted by Banu Hanifa, manipulated the steel, is the steel sharpens in the sun. It has the opposite effect, which is like pretty amazing. And it has the opposite effect inside of the sun. They get sharper, not to get blunter. And so Khalid Walid remarks, it's going to be a difficult day. This is going to be a difficult day. You're facing people who know the art of the sword. And so it came to pass, and it was the most difficult day of the companions, radiallahu anhum wardahum, yani in terms of battle, radiallahu ta'ala anhum, yani wardahum. Tayyib, inshallah ta'ala. Do you have any questions? Inshallah ta'ala, we'll finish there, inshallah ta'ala. يعني عفوا وبه إليه قال حدثنا عقبة ابن مكرم البصري حدثنا محمد بن بكر عن عثمان بن سعد بهذا الإسناد نحوه. The tradition of Sayyidina Uthman ibn Sa'd related to the tradition with a meaning similar to the aforementioned tradition of Sayyidina Muhammad ibn Sirin, rahimahullah ta'ala. So do you have any questions, inshallah ta'ala? Any questions? Any questions? Do you have any questions, inshallah ta'ala? يعني Banu Hanifa, لا, Allahu A'lam. The sword makers of Banu Hanifa still exist. Allahu A'lam, we don't even, quote unquote, even have sword makers really, do we? Especially traditional sword makers. Okay, the science of the sciences, just like the sciences, the martial way have died, yani the ummah, and the sciences of that which complements the martial way, like the sciences of the crafting of swords, of the crafting of of bows, arrows, of the crafting of of the rimah, long staff, short staff. All of those khalas died, which of the primary reasons, quote unquote, why we find ourselves in the condition what we find ourselves in. That's why the Prophet in the Musnad, the Prophet said, إِذَا تَرَكْتُمُ الْجِهَادِ, that when you abandon jihad, sallallahu alaykum aduwwum min khayrikum, and when you abandon jihad, and here jihad in all of its meanings, but of its meanings, let's not forget, is the art of war, yani. When you abandon the art of war, amongst other of the meanings of jihad, then Allah Ta'ala will subjugate you to an enemy from without. And Allah Ta'ala will keep it that way حتى ترجع إلى دينك, until you return back to your religion. And part of returning back to your religion is returning back to the art and the instruments of war. Okay, that they clear. But that they Allah Ta'ala, and alam, and how it repeats. That kind of the old world gone. Even in terms of really the last real people of swords, with the Japanese, yani, with the katana, yani, they say that I think there are only two people alive, and that was only a few years ago. Allah, if they're still alive, two people alive who have the traditional method with transmission going all the way back. And even then, in a country that does pride itself from a perspective upon the maintenance of the martial way, yani, even the craft of the sword, yani, is about to be lost if it's not lost already. Yani. Traditional methods, yani. Allah Ta'ala alam, yani. Any questions, inshallah ta'ala? Yeah, sword fighting, Allah alam, yani, we said the best to preserve it. It's not exclusive, but the best, and maybe the best and the most accessible, yani, are the Japanese, yani. That the Japanese, and then that in terms of kendo. And so kendo, remember, kendo is what is the art of the samurai, yani. So it's the samurai. That's where you learn the art of the samurai in terms of kendo. I remember the samurai, which is only the samurai really is only like 6-7 centuries old. The Japanese samurai, yani. I mean, the samurai take many of their ways of war from the Muslim. Their armor modeled upon the Muslim. Heck, the historical documents. So the samurai, that's why it's not just about looking at the Japanese. It's trying to understand where did the Japanese get it from. And so if the Japanese now have access, quote unquote, to our tradition, because the soundness of thought is that although we say that the martial way of the Prophet has been lost, has it altogether been lost? When at the end of time, the Prophet speaks about what? About the Mahdi and his people hanging their swords upon trees, in imitation of the Prophet ﷺ. When the Rasul speaks about them being on horseback, and the Imams can debate it, a literal or as a metaphor, but the literal says whatever the literal says, yani horses, swords, and what have you. And so thereby you'd understand in that ad-Din, Isnad, religion is transmission, that there has to be some baqaya, somewhere Allah Ta'ala must have deposited the way of the Rasul ﷺ for later generations who truly interested to take from and to bring back. And so kendo there is, quote unquote, if somebody wants to learn the sword, yani kendo is the first port of call, yani to learn the sword. And kendo very advanced, yani very advanced, very hard. And even in traditions where the Prophet ﷺ is forbid in Bukhari and others, the Prophet has forbid a person brandishing a sword, a Muslim, brandishing a sword to another Muslim. You can't do it, it's haram, yani. For you to unsheathe your sword in front of another Muslim, period. Playing around even, messing. Let's train together. None of that. Can't do it, Harry. You can't brandish a sword to another Muslim, haram. According to the dictate of the Prophet ﷺ, inside of Sahih al-Bukhari. And so when people ask the question, and so then how did the Sahaba train swords? And what the Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya has it in his Furusiyya, in his chivalry, his book on chivalry, which looks at the arts of Futuwa, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya, rahimahullah ta'ala, that the Sahaba used wood. Okay, they used wood in order to practice, because there's no prohibition upon wood. The prohibition is upon what? Is upon using swords, steel, yani. And then what's our point? Because that's exactly what you learn in kendo, isn't it? So kendo is called the shinai. So the shinai, and it is what you're going to use, which is sort of a wooden sword. That's what you're going to use, quote unquote, to practice in terms of kendo. Okay, illa second, which you learn alongside kendo, okay, is another art of the Japanese, which is called aido. Aido is the second art, aido. But aido, you use a sword. Now you're going to use a physical sword in terms of aido, but aido, which again, you see how it locks into the Islamic framework, the prophetic framework. Aido, you cannot have an opponent. Okay, there can be no physical opponent in front of you in terms of aido. It's like, as an example, and you're maybe the parallel for some, if anyone's did karate or taekwondo or the likes of, in terms of kata or pumse, yani kata, Japanese, pumse, Korean. Anyone did kata or pumse? Anyone did karate? Anyone know what a kata is? Kata is, okay? But remember, kata, you're fighting enemies, isn't it? Pumse, you're fighting enemies, but there's no enemy there. You're just learning the moves, how to take out 2 enemies, 3 enemies, 4 enemies simultaneously. This is the kata or pumse. And so aido similar. So aido, it's swords, but there's no physical enemy in front of you. Obviously for us, due to the prohibition, okay? And so thereby there has to be what you call tajreed. Tajreed is how then do you strip, okay? Another way, how do you have an imaginary enemy in front of yourself? That there's somebody imaginary in front of you, quote unquote, and thereby now you're in a duel with that imaginary opponent. That's the science of aido. Like very, very high end, and very, very psychological, very, very spiritual. But it's often at a higher level, it's now going to be twinned with kendo. Kendo, more physical, you do have the opponent, whereas aido, your opponent is imaginary. Kendo, you're going to use wood. Aido, you'll actually use what? You'll actually use steel. And they're the most advanced sort of arts upon earth. The grading for kendo, 9th dan for kendo, is considered the most difficult exam upon the face of the earth. Yani. The most difficult exam. For somebody to reach 9th dan in kendo, like very few people ever make it. Yani. Ever make it. It's considered the most difficult exam upon the face of the earth, which shows you the importance of the sword. Yani. The importance of the sword. I remember that the issue of, and we get it, like the Japanese to this day, in all of those sort of companies, whatever your Toyotas, your Nissan, whatever those companies are that you believe, quote unquote, are very successful on the face of the earth. If you go to Tokyo, Osaka, or what have you, where they have their headquarters, their basements are all kendo dojos, yani. You ready? That's the first thing all of those CEOs do. I kind of read upon the CEOs. The first thing they do, they go to the martial arts first thing in the morning. All the CEOs, the day with kendo in the morning. As soon as they finish, shower, take the lift from the basement to the top floor. It's business time, yani. And so Allah Ta'ala alam hakada. And even if somebody is not interested in the martial arts, but they're interested in the business arts, then the likes of the sword is a prerequisite for it. The sirs, the secrets that Allah Ta'ala deposited inside of the sword. And remember, yani, for masculinity, a man without a sword should question his masculinity, should question it. How come there wasn't the age of the Prophet ﷺ? That's why you see the Rasul when he goes for Hudaybiyah, he's going for Umrah. In the 6th year, ﷺ, we're not coming for war, we're not coming with weapons, any of that. Okay, sure. But they still have their swords. Like, why? Ever got the point? Well, you're not coming for war, you're not, but you still have your swords. Why? Because swords was a symbol of masculinity, it was a symbol of honor. It's not necessarily a symbol of war or a threat, it's a symbol of honor inside of a man, yani. You sure? That's why you still see to this day inside of the Yemen, in North Yemen in particular, how they'll have the jambir. You have the dagger, they'll always have the dagger with them, yani. That they're not like as some type of threat, yani, but it's part of the regalia or the honor that a man must have, yani. Okay? And Allah Ta'ala alam. And so obviously in an age where masculinity has been lost, yani, sure, you can see the symbols of how and where it's been lost likewise. Even if you throw a man a sword, ask a man to wield a sword, he's more likely to cut himself than to cut an opponent, isn't he? Like, doesn't know how to handle it, yeah. Sure, okay. Anyone have any questions? Start what? Hey, what? And the first we say, yani, Allah, I think the Japanese are probably more sound upon that. Yani. The Japanese won't allow children to learn. It's extended arm, yani. It's life or death. They won't allow, even with the Shinai, they won't allow children, quote unquote, to learn the sword. Yani. It's an adult activity. Okay. Although in England there are there are kendo dojos that do allow children. But Allah, you're asking the fakir. The Japanese are more sound in that regard. We have to distinguish between what is a sound for the child to learn and what is a sound for an adult to learn. And it's sound for the child to learn to swim, sound for the child to learn the horse, sound for the child to learn wrestling, grappling, all them sound. And if somebody who they can't handle their own body, or they can't handle the body of another person, how can they handle something that extends from the arm like a sword or a bow and arrow and what have you? They're not child activities, and that Allah, I mean, what then should the child learn? Get them to the dojo to learn, mashallah ta'ala, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, Greco-Roman, freestyle, whatever. That's where they should be at. And when they get to mashallah, a degree of mashallah to have competency in that, and they reach adulthood, then you can speak about the bow and arrow. Then you can speak about mashallah ta'ala, the sword or the spear or whatever it may be. No, يعني خلاص بلوغ بلوغ. I can say بلوغ. Remember the Prophet ﷺ with extended arm, with the Prophet ﷺ with the bow and arrow. We've got the Rasul ﷺ at 14 years of age, وسلم, at Fijar. Okay, if we want to look at when did the Rasul ﷺ reach quote unquote يعني at maturity, يعني biological maturity, then that's understood at 10 years of age with the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, with splitting over his chest in the tradition at 10 years of age. So the Rasul, we understand that he's an adult when the Prophet ﷺ is with the bow and with the arrow. You can, quote unquote, someone can say, well, what about the tradition of Abdul Muttalib? When Abdul Muttalib now is quote unquote kidnapped or taken by his uncle, and the Muttalib ibn Abd Manaf, he's the one who takes him. But where does he find Abdul Muttalib? On the archery range, isn't he? He's firing upon the archery range. And he's only 7. And Abdul Muttalib, well, Allah Alam, you can say that's khususiyya, you can say that's prior to Islam, or whatever you can say. In 7 years of age, somebody be on an archery range and to be perfect as Abdul Muttalib was when he was shooting upon the archery range, then Allah Ta'ala Alam. Okay? But what's better and proper and safer, is that it's anything that can kill, like a sword can kill, or an arrow can kill, or a spear can kill. That's something more so for matured intelligence, adulthood, Allah, the faqih would say no, because you're recommending something at the expense of something else, isn't it? Meaning, deen needs focus. So why aren't they doing wrestling? Why aren't they doing jiu-jitsu? Why aren't they doing gymnastics? Why aren't they learning to horse, to groom a horse, to raid, or to raise a horse, to ride a horse? Why aren't they doing all of that? You mean it? Uh, uh, why aren't they doing it more? You with it? Yeah, you get the point. Like focus is focus, yani. Like anybody, like for instance, the Chinese martial arts, yani, to become a master of the arts of the Chinese, there are 19 different disciplines. You're not learning 19 at the same time. Remember, there's an order, like Imam Tahawi says, Mulazamat al-Ula. There are priorities for mastery, yani. Enter the house through its gateways, through its doorways. You understand? And ich shuf, like the priorities. We have to understand order in which it's like somebody saying, I want to study usul al-fiqh, and you ain't studied fiqh, or you ain't studied lughat al-Arab, the language of the Arabs. How are you going to study usul al-fiqh there? You have to, yani, there's a priority that you must learn, master before you go into that which comes thereafter. Do you understand? هكذا. يعني يستعجلون الفتح دون شروطه. هكذا the basis of what the fiqh is hearing, because the sister's insistence يعني about it, is that يعني يستعجلون الفتح دون شروطه, that what you hasten the opening without the preconditions, without engaging the priorities. ومن استعجل الأمر دون أوانه عوقب بحرمانه. And whoever hastens affair before its proper time, without the necessary instruments, they'll be punished through being barred from the thing they're trying to hasten. You'll never achieve it, yani. So if somebody wants to, like, what do you want for your child? You want your child to master the martial way, isn't it? So they have to pursue the path of mastery, which is not like you know what I mean, do what you like. It's not do what you like. There's a curriculum. You understand? Aywa. Let's make this a conversation. Go on. Go on.
So I wanted to know, obviously, which age did they start on that? I'm just giving you an example of my one teacher. She likes horse riding, but then I put her into jiu-jitsu and she's been doing it for years. She's just like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do something. Shall I just give her more horse riding lessons and just get her into that?
No, what you got to say is Khadija. Every time you come home from jiu-jitsu, Khadija, Aisha, I know it's Aisha, Khadija, I know where Khadija disappeared to, is I'm going to give you a present. Watch, you'll soon like it. You get the point. Once you give it an incentive, because adults don't like the martial way. Like you ask brothers who train jiu-jitsu, like every jiu-jitsu session is a war to go is difficult, isn't it? And you got to go to war against the nafs just to go to that jiu-jitsu session or to that grappling session. So adults don't like it. It's difficult, yeah. The nafs don't like things like that, yeah. So you got to understand the child as a nafs katrifli, the child which is nafs, yeah, ain't gonna like it. It's problematic if the child do like it, yeah. You with it? So just all you got to do is one, that's the importance of the parent, and then two, the incentive often. Even if the incentive is just praise and encouragement, but the incentive just to make the child, mashallah ta'ala. If you look at children who start the mashallah, they started in childhood, they start the mashallah. And for children, then look at them, those who complete it. It's probably like 1%. After start, I'm talking about even if they get to like the brown belts and what have you, they basically are black. Even if they get to black, they're gonna quit. By the time they become adult to the 17, 18, they're gonna quit it because they never liked it from the beginning. The only reason they did it because their parents were the ones who were making them do it. But that's one of the duties of the parents, Yani, to make sure, mashallah, that how are you going to raise proper men, quote unquote, if a man is meant to be a protector and he can't protect? And if a man can't protect, then women got to be able to protect, isn't it? Like we're following people. And the women of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they could protect, yani. They could protect. These arts, they could wield them. Like you didn't hear, like we give examples of saying Nasiba when it comes to war, like at Uhud or the like. Oh man, I'm gonna have to learn how to use a sword. I'm gonna have to learn how. Like she could already gone done that. Asma bint Yazid anha wardaha. She already gone done that. Yarmouk bint Khalid Walid. She kills 9. Yani Sayyidina Khawla bint Mizwar anha wardaha. Likewise at Yarmouk. Shuf. How she goes all the way to Istanbul to retrieve her brother Zihar anhu. Yani wardahu. How many people she kills the great night upon Yarmouk. Anha was Sayyidina Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib. They answered the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There a Khandaq going arm to arm combat with one of the finest warriors of the Jews there of Qurayza there, and how could she emerges victorious, Senator Safiya. What I'm trying to say, they didn't have to learn, what I'm going to do now. They already gone raised like that, yani. You with it? How could that? And necessary in our day and age. And remember, it's not shuf, again, so people don't misunderstand it. Remember, the arts of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as he is sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he sent to the inward before he sent to the outward. So you don't think about swords, quote unquote, about the external effect that they have upon an enemy, because your greatest enemy is yourself. It's about the internal effect that it has. We said, look, the Japanese, they're learning it. Japan, do they even have a standing army? Have they been allowed one now since World War II? Allah Ta'ala alam. The Japanese, you know what I mean? But sure, the Japanese, sure, they began to quote unquote dominate the world from a very, very different way. They used the martial arts, but in a different way. For the refinement of the self, yani. You know, read Miyamoto Musashi, read, you get the point, the Chinese read Sun Tzu in his Art of War, yani. When you actually look at it, these are the texts that are more so like in the Five Rings of Miyamoto Musashi or Sun Tzu's The Art of War. When you read those type of books, they're the books that are probably most read in business, yani, as guides for how a businessman should be, as opposed to guides for how a warrior should be. You understand? Yeah. You got it, Ucht? Yeah, I hope so. Muhammad, why have you stopped? The Islamic way, and that's not Islamic. Tell him to behave, yani. Tell him to behave. You can get back on the horse, innit? Innit? Full stop, yani. It's not even a conversation like it is with your mother. It's not even a conversation, yani. So if these are the arts of the Nabi Sallallahu Wasallam, like how could you put aside that which was the most beloved thing to the Prophet Sallallahu Wasallam? Sure, the most beloved to the Prophet was horses. The hadith saying Anas ibn Malik rahimahullah ta'ala. How are you going to put that aside? Sure. And that day we've got to understand, yani, that this is the love of the Nabi Sallallahu Wasallam. Never you with a horse, save that you're mashallah ta'ala with the Prophet Wasallam. And if you're with Arabian, remember every Arabian horse goes back to the 9 horses of the Prophet Wasallam, the ajdad, the grandfathers they call them. Like how would somebody swerve that aside? And shuf kayf araftum. It's like somebody says, no, the deen is a deen of Ahlul Bayt. Okay, there's horses that are Ahlul Bayt as well. Innit? Abba and Jed, they all go back to the horses of the Nabi. They're Ahlul Bayt. And so swerving aside horses is like swerving aside religion. Yani. Often, hakada, really, really important horses. Yani. Cannot be underestimated. A human being, horses far more important than the sword. Horses far more important, quote unquote, than the bow, the arrow. Far more important. I'm talking about horses. I'm talking about horse riding. Horses. Human reality is completed through horses. Yani. They say they're going to tell us that, quote unquote, that hakada, they tell us in terms of advancement of human reality, that the most significant point quantum leap the human being took in his advancement as a human being was when he was able to subjugate a horse, when he was able to take a horse from the wild and quote unquote discipline a horse. That day human being advanced as a human being. Then what about when the horse is no longer in our lives? What has happened to the human being? You get the point. Like we've seen what's happened to the human being when he's took a dog as a best friend. We've seen that, innit? Sure. But that they're taking a dog as a best friend. Part of it is that you no longer have the horse as a best friend. Sure, okay. And so I kind Muhammad, innit? It's simple. And you're gonna remount that horse. Innit? Any questions? And then the worst is never mind he's no longer on the horse. The worst are those who've never been on a horse. You read it? They're even worse. And the man ain't even never took to the horse, ain't even tried the horse, ain't even. And then I'm talking about here in particular men. And then if you go to quote unquote to horse riding schools, it's basically exclusively women, girls and women. They're the ones who've taken to the horse, and basically exclusively. And go to any horse riding school up and down the land, up and down the country. Like you get the women, or men just statues sitting, and dead bodies sitting. And something's really gone wrong, really gone wrong. So Muhammad is going to lead the way in it. And especially your name Muhammad. Your name Muhammad, yani. If your name Muhammad, you better do what Muhammad does, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, isn't it? It's sort of, you can't have a choice. Like if your name's Benny the Clown, then do what Benny does, isn't it? Like, you get the point. If that's who you are, but if your name Muhammad, be Muhammad, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. If your name Ahmed, be Ahmed, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Your name Anas, be Anas. Your name Abdullah, be Abdullah. هكذا يعني خلاص كن اسمك يعني. Be your name يعني. طيب, go on.
Yes, so the break that's lost. The imams of our religion kind of saying why it was lost, any wisdom behind that, and if it would ever be found?
Well, so it was mentioned yesterday, is the Dars that the ring, the wisdom is that the power of or the door of fitna, yani was tied to the ring of the Prophet ﷺ. So long as the ring is present, then the door of fitna, of tribulation, is closed. When the ring was lost, and here we mentioned it was in the 6th year of the reign of Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, rahimahullah ta'ala, of the Imam say to the very day, that when that ring now was lost, then the door of fitna was now open to the ummah of the Rasul sallallahu to the very end of time. Will it ever be found? Allah ta'ala, that's a question that was also leveled. What we do know is that the ring of Sulaiman will re-emerge, the ring of Sulaiman. And Allah, whether that's considered to be a deputy of the ring of the Prophet ﷺ, because the supreme name is still there. Remember, on the ring of the Rasul, yani Muhammad, Rasul, Allah, the ring of the Prophet ﷺ, the ring of Sulaiman, La ilaha illa ana Muhammadun Rasuli. So the only name, actual name upon the ring of Sulaiman is the name of the Prophet ﷺ, Muhammad. That's upon the ring. And we do know that ring emerges, but it emerges at the end of time, and with the Dabba. It emerges with the Dabba, the Dabba, the beast at the end of time. Although there is an opinion that the actual ring of Sulaiman is going to be found inside of the Taboot, the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant will be rediscovered by the Mahdi. The Mahdi will rediscover the Ark of the Covenant inside of the Vatican. And so Allah Alam. So is that rediscovering of the Ark of the Covenant, in which you find many things, from amongst them the ring of Sulaiman alayhi salam, is that now the means for the re-emergence of the Ummah of the Rasul, victorious? Then it'd be a sound assumption, but it's not something we can that we can be certain of. Any questions?
Shaykh, is it true that the companions practice a type of striking/sparring whilst avoiding the face? And if so, would we consider that to be some?
Allah Alam. Can we consider the striking to be from the arts of the Prophet ﷺ? First and foremost, no. Do we consider that the companions radiallahu anhum practiced in a type of striking, quote unquote, except that they weren't striking the face? You have to bring your proof upon that. And we understand that people now in this love of mixed martial arts and what have you, but understanding that we can't strike the face, Hadith Bukhari, crystal clear, you can't strike the face. They've substituted that with body shots, with body shots. Okay? Is it a type of legitimacy? We'd say the fuqaha would no doubt give it a type of legitimacy there, but to go as far as saying it's the sunnah of the Rasul sallallahu and that the companions practiced it, then on that you have to sort of bring your dalil. We did make mention of the hadith in the chapter of the sandal of the Prophet sallallahu a hadith of saying Abu Hurairah anhu and saying Umar ibn Khattab rahimahullah ta'ala punches Abu Hurairah. He gives him a chest blow, to say Abu Hurairah, saying Umar does. And saying Umar wouldn't do that unless it was permissible. He's not going to strike you physically with a punch unless that was permissible. But to go as far as saying they trained that, but they trained wrestling. That day they trained grappling. That day they trained archery. They trained the what you call the spear and the harbar and these short staffs and whatnot. That's what they train. That's very clear. You have the dalil for that. And it's similar to the question there. If you have the dalil for that, why are you looking for something else? It's sketchy. When it's looking for something that is sketchy, that is something relates more so to nufus there. It's what the nafs wants to do, isn't it? It's not what the ruh wants to do.
Are we allowed to bow like the Japanese in their martial arts?
No, we're not allowed to bow. Okay? And we bow to God, we bow to Allah Jalla Jalaluhu wa Ta'ala Azamatuhu. Rei, that's what they call it in Japanese. Rei is the bow, Rei. Sure, even if they say like one of them in Kendo, they'll say there's no Kendo except through Rei. You have to bow, whatever. Whatever. That day, one of the things that's good about the Brazilians just touch it. How kind of Brazilians? Subhanallah. I think that's one of the tawfiq that the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is hard, because the reality that a martial arts closer to the Sunnah, far superior to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So sometimes you got to ask that, why does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu have so much tawfiq, and I'm even amongst Muslims, and even growing in this tawfiq. Part of it, that a lot of its adabs can concur with the adabs of the deen of Allah Ta'ala. And often, like the lack of bowing, And the Brazilians good with that, Touch. Japanese bowing is so important, yani. Subhanallah. Ewa.
Is it closer to the sunnah to wear a watch on your right wrist instead of your left?
There ain't no sunnah than wearing a watch. You get the point. Somebody has the closer to the sunnah to wear a watch on the right hand. There's no sunnah than wearing a watch. Yani. You get the point. Yeah, remember, the cosmos has time engraved upon it, as does the human being. You get the point. I mean, you want to know the time, look at the sun. You want to look at the time, look at the moon. Yeah, you should look at the stars. Khalas, time is telling you. As they say, the quote unquote, the heavens is telling. They tell us. Ain't no sunnah than wearing a watch there. Why are you wearing a watch? You wearing a watch because the kuffar wear watches. Fools, stop. Don't tell me anything else. Why? Why else? Hey, what? Why? Why? Like, why you wearing a watch? Because the kuffar wear it. Yeah. That's why, the Shaykh Ahmad Fodio, that's why he said, forks and spoons and knives, or forks and spoons, he says, there's hurma, there's haram. And the Shaykh in fiqh is soft, yani. He's balanced, mu'tadal, yani. But someone said that's an extreme factor. Why is he saying it's haram? He says, because tashabbuh bil kuffar, yani. You're only imitating the kuffar. Tell me all the reason why you're wearing it. Can you trace the spoon back to the Nabi? Can you trace a fork back to the Nabi? So I said, you can't. How could the Shaykh Ahmad Fodio says? What about a watch? I mean, a watch was made by who? Franciscan monks, wasn't it, in the 12th century? They're the ones who made it. And the Christians made it in order to measure Christian worship. So it actually even returns back to religion, but Christian religion. Actually, the ones who invented the watch. And we're not saying the watch is haram or whatever, but it is tashabbuh. Clear that. But what you better not do is say that it's sunnah. Which one's closer to the sunnah there? Is it wearing upon the right hand or upon the left hand? It's wearing upon no hand. That's closer to the sunnah. And else.
And Muslims use modern weaponry and bombs which kill indiscriminately.
And Allah Alam, I think you're going to have to ask a faqih because Muslims use quote unquote modern weapons, bombs, and what have you, that can indiscriminately kill. And that day now, that day is not close to the sunnah, is it? That day is actually and again, that likewise tashabbuh bil kuffar, isn't it? Like, why Muslims using modern weaponry? Because the kuffar use modern weaponry, as if that was the standard, quote unquote, by virtue which the Ummah of the Rasul should be measured. Yani. You get them, and Allah Ta'ala Adam. Yani. But that day you're going to kill indiscriminate people. Then Muslims know better than what the Israelis are doing, isn't it? Can we put quote unquote semtex inside of pages and mobile phones? Isn't it? They do it, we do it. What type of nonsense that, yani? And sure. We don't take our orders from them, from the enemies of Allah Ta'ala. We don't react to what they do. We don't try to compete, quote unquote, what they have, yani. ومن فوق, from Allah Jalla Jalaluhu wa Ta'ala Azamatuhu. أيوة هكذا يعني.
There's no place for traditional weapons of war in the modern context of the terrible weapons of war, which are not hand-to-hand, like rather remote, like drones and bombs.
Like which?
Like drones and bombs.
Hey, why didn't somebody think, and I came to you just now, I had one of those moments of inspiration. Why don't you think of a drone that has arrows in it? Like, what about that in it? Like a drone in it? Like, let's have, we call it the Archer. You know what I mean? Archer, you know what I mean? 1.0, 2.0 Archer, innit? Just flies through the air. Fires arrows. Muhammad, we can paint that, innit? We'll split it. 50-50, inshallah ta'ala, we'll paint it. Araf. And why not? But كيف يعني Allah Ta'ala alam. You with it? As for using it, but Allah Ta'ala alam, and هكذا the Fakir would embrace that. Like drones and what have you, that's Tyran Ababil. That's where they've taken that from, isn't it? That's the army of God for Abdul Muttalib, the birds in battle array coming from the sky. That's what that's an imitation of. So there can be a type of legitimacy, quote unquote, in drones, but it's what does drones fire? And you get the point. And we have to always be careful of fire. That you have the binar illa rabbinar. And nobody punishes with fire except the Lord of fire. We have to be careful of all that stuff, yani. Allah Ta'ala alam. That ain't us. That ain't us. It ain't us, yani. And the bombs and all that type of stuff. Anyway. Any further questions, inshallah ta'ala? Any further questions? No questions.